the fairest sex they call us. But the rules of the game, are they?
To welcome on stage a dreamer, a doer, someone who's gotten many things done. Smriti Irani, thank you very, very much for joining us here, and please join us for the Future Female Forward Summit. Right here. So let me start by asking you about your own personal journey. And I know that, you know how to give it back, especially on social media. And I'm sure that, today while we were putting this together and we were tweeting about this event, somebody commented saying, woke is equal to broke, and that's the sort of response that we very typically get, and I'm sure that that's been your experience as well. How do you deal with that?
I don't. The poetess sat there and the forest said nothing. The digital forest speaks a lot. The issue is that while you introduced me as a dreamer and a doer, you forgot that I'm also a disruptor. And those who tend to disrupt and sometimes swim against the tide, they genuinely have no time for cacophony. But it is prudent to here say that I do have time for constructive criticism. I think that if I wallow in self-pity when I'm attacked, I won't have the mind frame to apply myself to a new day. And that is why you can post what you want to communicate. If you're spending your time reading what the reactions are, you're giving much leverage to those who want to use a platform to demean your efforts. So for me, if the forest doesn't shout back, I do.
Well, you talked about disruption. So, Smriti Irani, let me ask you this. And I pointed out that this is an effort for us because we saw what the COVID-19 pandemic did. In many ways, it set back the move towards gender parity, and the disproportionate burden of the pandemic was on women. And we saw a lot of women opt out because of the care economy not being able to be as accessible as it was previously. So I want to first understand from you, in the quest to build back better, what do you think are the key interventions?
I think the nomenclatures you used today, Shireen, are internationalized from many contexts. For instance, when the global lockdown was inevitable, there was a statement given from an international agency in New York that 80% of Indian women are possibly right now going to get beaten at their homes because there will be a possibility of lockdown, which meant that 80% of our families are predators and violent towards women. So I did call up somebody who works at that agency in New York, and I said, can you please tell me, where did you reach this number and this presumption about India? They said it's a supposition. So when do suppositions become fact? That is something that we need to be very mindful of. Today we have 400 million women who are in the working age group, of which 300 million women are already in the unorganized segment of our economy, which means 100 million women today are in the working age group and may want to either sustain themselves by maintaining status quo or be ambitious enough to look for a future which is embedded in new skills, which is embedded in new enterprise. And if you look at the pronouncements in the budget recently, I think that premise is very firmly set from a perspective of the grassroots. That the budget's first page itself talks about the women's collective at the grassroots through a self-help group and a network to be created through clusters, I think speaks volumes about what has been projected in terms of potential by women at the grassroots. You have close to 8 million self-help groups in the country, 90 million women who are a part of it. They manage yearly close to $30 to $32 billion worth of credit. Till now, the government of India has transferred to their bank account under Prime Minister Modi's leadership close to 6 lakh crore rupees. That is a huge volume of money for women to have handled and to have serviced manufacturing and servicing needs in our country at the very grassroots. And I'm extremely proud as a woman that when you look at NPAs, we do better than men. That being said, this is not the only story India is telling. There is the Mudra story. I see an esteemed member of the financial services world, Naina Lal Kidwai, is seated here. And I remember 2014 when I first received a responsibility administratively. We wanted to talk about women's leadership in academic institutions. That is how I met Ms. Kidwai first. And one of the greatest advice she gave me was, if you look at leadership capacities of women today, can we see how do we fix a problem of our past? Which is many a young women never saw academic management leaders in their own academic institutions. If we start positioning them at the helm of administrative charge, you at a very young age ingrain an understanding that women can academically but administratively with power lead institutions. We saw when Mudra came to the fore, it was not a gendered financial service.
Yes.
And of the 320 million loans given out, 70% went to women, which means that we had 200 million women in our country that have proven themselves to be fiscally not only sound, but also fiscally relevant and successful. So while I have 90 million women in self-help groups, 200 million female enterprises, my challenge is when I move around in corporate India and I'm told we don't find women enough, the numbers are not enough to get them into our boardrooms. And all the women in the audience are smiling.
Yes, and I agree with you. I think much more effort has to be put into creating that pipeline, and we'll address that issue. But you know, you talked about women in positions of power and in administrative charge. We've seen a huge difference and a huge change on account of what's happened at the grassroots level with the panchayat elections and so on and so forth. The women's reservation bill in Parliament. Everyone says that they support it privately, publicly as well. There are
No, in fact, I was a member of the Rajya Sabha when Arun Jaitley ji was the leader of opposition. And I myself not only was a witness but also a contributor to passing it in the Rajya Sabha when the Congress party was in power but didn't have the, not the numbers, but the guts to pass it. So we did.
You have the numbers.
I was right there.
You have
but
the numbers.
I think that in your beginning lines, when you spoke about the Global Gender Gap Index, both of us were recently at Davos. One of the greatest fallacies that when it comes to how do you customize or how do you significantly draw attention to female power potentially in a country. You look at only the Global Gender Gap Report, but what is the disservice it does to the women of India? In the Global Gender Gap Index, Indian women who are voted to legislative assemblies are not factored.
Yeah.
They are not counted. Indian women who are ministers of state in the government of India and the Council of Ministers are not counted. Women who are ministers in the state are not counted.
Yeah.
Of the 3 million women who are elected to grassroots offices, political offices across the world, 1.4 million women are Indian women. They are not factored in, as though winning an election in a panchayat does not matter for WEF. And that is why I'm extremely pleased that the World Economic Forum
Has changed.
woke up to that premise in India. It did not consider the fact that the 15th Finance Commission has now translated the spend at the grassroots and tied it to gender spend and gender justice. These two components were never factored. I'm this time hopeful that when the World Economic Forum rose up and said, yes, there have been anomalies made, let's bring them in perspective and correct it. I think that's the first step forward towards possibly seeing a change in the numbers. Because if you just factor in the number of women surely who are voted into office in India, your space suddenly in the index will shoot up. The question is, would they like us to shoot up in that index?
Well, they've acknowledged the fact that they will be making changes
The
to the
acknowledgement of
methodology.
the anomaly is the first big step. I think that now they know that if the future has to positively move forward for the world, you have to factor in the Indian woman.
But what about factoring in the Indian woman in Parliament? You have the numbers.
I think that you do not look at myopically the issue of emancipation only from a perspective of Parliament. I mean, I do have somebody who lost an election to me who rues the fact that he doesn't get to speak in Parliament, doesn't factor in the fact that he himself is missing from Parliament many a times. I think that when you look at the issues or the agency of women, should we be myopic enough to limit it to one particular legislative piece? Do we need to now look beyond and see a larger scope? And why do I say this? 30 years later, we've now had a new education policy, which has a precise segment of a gender inclusion fund. The fact that after 7 decades of democratic independence, we for the first time have a gender inclusion fund which now wants to propagate how the financial flow to a state in academics will be gendered, I think speaks volumes about what needs to be addressed. The second issue is, when I look at the healthcare sector, the story of Ayushman Bharat is not completely told. Till such time you factor in that for the first time in the history of our country, the poor in our country, 31 crore cancer screenings were done, of which over 17 crore cancer screenings were done by women from the poorest of the poor family. And those screenings were about cancer of the cervix and breast cancer. Now, every woman in this room knows that the presumption about cancer of the cervix is that this is not a socially acceptable point of conversation. And there's a presumption that if you talk about the cancer of the cervix, you possibly would not do it in a family system or in a community system. The fact that in our country 17 crore women use the Ayushman Bharat card, obviously went to a medical institution, got themselves tested, everybody at home must have known. The fact that they did this is indicative of two things. That women, in especially our rural landscape, were never bereft of information. What they were disenfranchised from was access to a solution, and institutional access, which is being created. So while there are some people who obviously, when enforcement directorate knocks on their door, suddenly think about the cause of women, women like me who have been in the field for over 2 decades know that what are the issues I wanted addressed. One, I wanted education to be addressed. Second, I wanted healthcare systems to be addressed. Third, I wanted issues like sanitation to be addressed. It is on this very channel, in 2013, there was a discussion that women who defecate in the open, 40% of them are sexually assaulted. That we as a nation state knew it then, but there was absolutely no political or administrative agenda to build a toilet for poor women. It was never a political agenda for anybody. That when the Prime Minister pronounced it from the ramparts of the Red Fort in 2014, he had already won a decisive victory. But he stood there and he said that when you talk about women's rights, let's first provide them the dignity with which they want to begin their day. 110 million toilets individually built for homes, prioritizing women. I think that for me is one of the greatest contributions to women's advocacy, rights, agency, whatever you may want to call it. Because women have never asked for, the sky. Your poetess went to a forest to speak her mind. Women never asked for things like, mujhe toilet chahiye. We made do, we did it in whispers. But for the first time, you have a Prime Minister who not only talks about building toilets, for heaven's sake, he went to the ramparts of the Red Fort and said, you want a sanitary pad which is affordable? Please go to the Jan Aushadhi Kendra. When was the last time we had a man publicly talk about you need access to a sanitary pad? Never happened. The fact that it's the Prime Minister of India, that for me was a big change.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you talked about the fact that, and I don't mean that we need to limit ourselves to reservation in Parliament, but
I'm very mindful that your parents are in the audience today. So my compliments.
They're brave enough to handle whatever you can throw at me. Not a problem at all.
No, I think, and why I'm mindful that your parents are in the audience today, Shireen, we don't turn out the way we turn out, like Battle Access, without the help of somebody in the family believing in our potential to fail. And then resurrect ourselves.
Absolutely.
Every parent individually designs a framework for their child to succeed. The burden of the desire to succeed is such that no child is ever told that you will be forgiven, you will still be loved if you fail. So battle axes, especially women, do not become battle axes because they are designed or trained only to win. They become battle axes because they know that even if we fail, we will rise back up and somebody, somewhere will still unconditionally love us.
Well, I hope.
And that is why I'm mindful of your parents.
No, I appreciate that, and yes, they have unconditionally supported me. But what I want to understand from you is, you talked about the 4 priorities that you've been focused on. In terms of the road ahead, what is it? What are the interventions that you're working on today? What is it that you would like to get done?
I think that we need to start conversations about the future of skills for women. If you look at the India Skills Report, you will find that women and men, when they are skilled, of men, you find that their employability is about 45%. Of women, the employability rises up to 51.44%, which means these women who went into skill centers were very focused on the skill sets that they were told to absorb as compared to men. My priority as a woman, and I'm not talking only as a minister in terms of conversation because the leadership of FICCI is here, how can we enhance that 51.44% to a 70%? And raise the employability of skilled women, because the government has a plenitude of policy initiatives for upskilling, reskilling women. What we need to ensure now with industry support is how do we increase their capacity to be re-employed or enhanced employment opportunities, or for that matter, if they want to transition from employment to enterprise, how do we assist that transition? So one is that. The second is that I have said it time and again that economies that have strongly shown resilience are economies where mid-sized companies have been aplenty. Now, if you look at the entry level in terms of enterprise, our SME or MSME segments, it is flooded with female enterprise. And I think Mudra is one such case which has proven it. Can we now identify sector-wise which are those women's enterprises that can transition to mid-sized companies, and what is the help that they need? And here I would like to also add that if you're looking at 300 million women in the unorganized segments, they are predominantly also in agriculture. Now, there are 3 classes of women in agriculture. 1, women who own land. 1, women who cultivate on land but don't own it. And 1, women who are laborers, not cultivators or owners. What is the skill set needed for these 3 verticals of women across the agricultural sector? And if you marry this segment, let's say to women in the self-help group, there will be a lot of industry contribution in agro-processing. But what are those segments of pre-processing where women are already positioned and their skill sets can be enhanced or can marry into the entrepreneurial possibilities of pre-processing? So that's my second ask. My third ask, and I have a laundry list, so whoever in the industry is reading my list, I've handed one over to the FICCI leadership, so he's a bit inundated with my big list, and I did have a conversation with him. I said, you took on a leadership role, and the women at FICCI conspired that their agenda becomes your agenda. So for FICCI now, the women's agenda is not only a conviction but also a compulsion. But my third ask is, when you look at the digital economy, most of our interfaces have shown, especially in the pandemic, women are very, very comfortable with the use of technology. But how do you enhance the time they spend with technology to better their lives? The only way to do it is if technology is available in their local language. The dominant language of technology right now is English. And in a country with 16,000 dialects, where if you want to empower a woman from the tribal belt, can you tell her suddenly to use technology only in English? So can we have more and more technology available from a perspective of use in the local languages so that women who know how to use technology find it easy to use in their everyday lives? So that's my third ask. And like I said, I have a laundry list.
You have a laundry list which you've already submitted to FICCI, and we'll put that out on social media. But thank you very much for prioritizing the 3 asks that you actually have for us. You know, when we were walking and you said, what are you going to make me do? And I said, we're going to have a conversation. You said, don't get me to do Natu Natu. So
you don't want Natu happening on the stage. You see, Natu Natu is about 2 men dancing. And being a woman today on this stage is making people dance to your tune. So there's a big difference.
No one dances to my tunes. But what a moment it was.
I think that it's also a moment which we celebrate from our linguistic diversity point of view.
Yeah.
The fact that in the Oscars there were 2 women.
I was just going to bring that up. 2 women who brought home the first Oscar for an Indian production. Yeah. Absolutely.
The men are feeling very sheepish right now, Shireen. You better move on. And it's, I think, paradoxical that two women received an Oscar for production, which was in the media business, whoever's been here knows, was supposedly a male bastion. Two men got it for singing and dancing.
Well, before I let you go and before we get you to felicitate some really fierce women here who are joining us here this evening, let me end by asking you, what has your journey been like just to be able to be comfortable in your skin? And I think we've all seen that, and the evolution has been pretty public as well. But what has it taken for you to be able to just be yourself?
To have parents like yours. But the difference is that I don't come from privilege. When my parents got married, they had $150. My first job, we are in this hotel, it's in Janpat.
Yes.
Exactly 500 meters from here on a road, I used to sell cosmetics for $200 a day. And now I sit 10 kilometers away in the minister's house. So though I do not come from privilege, I do come from a tenacious mother.
And may we all have lots of tenacious mothers who support us, who support our dreams, support our efforts and support our endeavors. Smriti Irani, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us here at the Future Female Forward Summit. I'm not going to let you go just yet. I'm going to invite Shruti back on stage. As I said, we have some fierce women here who we want to honor this evening. Shruti, it's over to you.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for such an engaging and forward-looking conversation. And of course, we want you both to remain here. I would like you to kindly stand so that they can take the chairs away.
Typical, take the chairs away.
Well, we continue with our conversation with Honorable Minister Smriti Irani and Shireen Bhan. In this session, we unlock the G20 Empower goals and planned activities. And I would like to first invite on stage Jayanti Dalmia, National President, FICCI Flow. A huge round of applause for Jayanti Dalmia. Now, 2023 is a special year for India, being at the helm of the G20 presidency. At the heart of India's G20 presidency agenda is Nari Shakti, a vision being actualized by the G20 Alliance for the Empowerment and Progression of Women's Economic Representation 2023. Now, led by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, G20 Empower 2023 aims to prioritize women-led entrepreneurship and a shift from development for women to women-led development models. FLOW, the women's wing of FICCI, is supporting the G20 Empower body in their endeavor to promote women's entrepreneurship across 3 levels: grassroots, middle, and senior levels. Before we move forward with the conversation, I would like to now invite my colleague Mangalam Mallu. A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Mangalam, who will now take this conversation forward. Here you go.
Yes, you guys spoke about tenacious mothers. What about supportive fathers and pushy brothers? That's what I'm here for. Future Female Forward. Men in pink always.
You want one for the men.
I apologize. Take one for the team here. But, I wore pink not only because it said that pink is a woman's color, etc. I just want to be a man proud in pink because there is no, color to a woman or a man, etc. Gender parity, that's what we're talking about here, right? So that's what we do. Well, Ms. Dalmia, I was reading the G20 Empower 2023, which aims to prioritize women entrepreneurship and women-led development. Just wanted to understand, do you have any projects in the pipeline for this right now? Some more details.
Yeah, FLOW is working a lot towards women empowerment. And one of the things, a couple of things that we're doing, we are supporting a lot of startups. I think we have close to 300 startups whom we are working with. We have flowpreneurs, we call them flowpreneurs, we have flow investors, and also flow mentors. So we have continuous workshops and events for them. So this is a startup, and then we have roundtable conferences for international trade, Also, we work with the grassroots. We try to train our members and even grassroots level people on digital literacy, on financial literacy. It's been a focus this year. And one of the focuses this year has been on inclusion. So we've been working on including the specially abled and differently abled in the workforce. And I could very proudly say that we have managed to kind of little bit move forward, and since it's the first year, I think by next year we should be quite good at it, you know. So yeah, we're working pan-India in 19 cities, from literally Jammu to Chennai and from Ahmedabad to Guwahati.
Wow, you see the smile on my face with that. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, now speaking on women entrepreneurs.